If you've ever noticed that you feel completely drained after being around certain people, even if nothing dramatic happened, this might explain it. You leave the conversation and suddenly you're exhausted. Your head feels heavy. You replay things you said. You wonder if you sounded rude or distant or weird. And the strange part is, they might not have done anything obviously wrong, but something in you feels used up. It doesn't look like a big deal from the outside. You were talking, smiling, listening, nodding, being normal. But internally, you were working. And that quiet work is what tires you. When you feel tired around certain people, it's rarely about physical energy. It's emotional energy, psychological energy, the kind you don't even realize you're spending in the moment. You might be monitoring their mood, adjusting your tone, filtering your words, choosing the safest version of yourself to present. That constant adjustment, that's emotional labor. And emotional labor is invisible. Some people naturally take up emotional space. They speak loudly, react strongly, and expect engagement. And if you're sensitive to emotional shifts, someone who notices subtle changes in tone, facial expression, energy, your nervous system goes on high alert around them. You start scanning. Are they upset? Did I say something wrong? Are they bored? Should I say more? Should I say less? This doesn't mean you're insecure, and it doesn't mean they're toxic. It means your brain has learned to stay attentive to other people's emotional states. Sometimes that learning started early. If you grew up in an environment where keeping the peace mattered, where moods were unpredictable, where being easy or low maintenance was rewarded, you may have developed a habit of reading the room before entering it. That's not a weakness, that's protection. And protection is energy consuming. Here's something subtle most people don't notice. Feeling tired around someone often means you don't feel fully safe being unfiltered around them. You might not feel unsafe, but you don't feel free either. So you perform small adjustments. You laugh when something isn't that funny. You hide your disagreement. You shorten your opinions. You become a slightly edited version of yourself. That editing process is quiet, but constant. And over time, it drains you. Now here's where it gets interesting. Most people assume this is about introversion versus extroversion. They think, I'm just introverted, that's why I'm tired. But that's not the full story. Because introverts don't feel drained around everyone. They feel drained around dynamics where they can't relax. You can be introverted and still feel energized around someone who lets you be quiet without pressure. You can be extroverted and still feel drained around someone who subtly demands attention, validation, or emotional caretaking. So the real issue isn't volume, it's boundaries. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but internal boundaries. The invisible line between your emotions and their emotions. If that line is blurry, you start carrying feelings that don't belong to you. Someone vents and you absorb it. Someone is irritated and you tense up. Someone is anxious and suddenly your chest feels tight. That's empathy overload. And empathy, when it has no boundary, turns into exhaustion. Some people experience this as people-pleasing. Others experience it as overthinking after conversations. Others just call it social anxiety. But beneath all of that is one pattern: over-responsibility for other people's internal states. And that over-responsibility becomes part of identity. You start seeing yourself as the understanding one, the calm one, the easy one, the one who smooths things over. And identity shapes behavior automatically. You don't consciously decide to manage the emotional temperature of the room. You just do it, because somewhere along the way, you learned that connection requires effort. And here's the deeper layer most people miss. When you feel tired around someone, it's not always because they're demanding. Sometimes it's because you're withholding. Withholding your opinions, withholding your boredom, withholding your discomfort, withholding your needs. And withholding takes more energy than expressing. Your nervous system stays slightly tense. Your thoughts stay slightly guarded. You're present, but not relaxed. That low-level tension is exhausting. It's like holding a small weight in your hand all day. It's not heavy enough to complain about, but by the end of the day, your arm aches. That's what emotional suppression feels like. And if you've done it long enough, you stop noticing the weight, you just notice the tiredness. Another hidden layer is control, not controlling others, controlling perception. You might be trying to control how you're seen, trying to avoid being misunderstood, trying to prevent conflict before it even exists. And that kind of hyper-awareness is a survival skill that became automatic. But it keeps your body in a subtle fight or flight. You're not fighting, you're not fleeing, you're performing stability. And performance drains energy faster than authenticity. That's why sometimes you can spend hours alone and feel restored, but spend 1 hour in the wrong dynamic and feel depleted. Because solitude requires no editing. There's no scanning, no monitoring, no adjusting, just presence. And here's something important. Feeling tired around someone doesn't automatically mean you dislike them. It doesn't mean they're bad. It simply reveals where your boundaries blur, where your identity shifts slightly to maintain harmony, where your empathy overrides your own signals. And once you start noticing that pattern, something changes. You begin to see that your exhaustion wasn't random. It was information. Information about where you feel emotionally responsible. Information about where you feel slightly unsafe being fully yourself. Information about where you learn to prioritize connection over comfort. And awareness doesn't yell, it just quietly clarifies. You start recognizing which interactions feel mutual and which feel like maintenance, which conversations feel flowing and which feel like work. And that awareness alone changes how you move. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. It was never about being antisocial. It was never about being weak. It was about energy boundaries you didn't realize you were crossing. And sometimes the tiredness wasn't a flaw, it was a signal. If this explains something you've been feeling but couldn't name, there's more beneath the surface. Understanding yourself is the beginning of everything.